Okay. Yeah. Quite likely. Yes. Okay. See? Okay. Sanje chedang soichi cholam chanjo badu dani chasuji dagi jinzo jipe sanam rola penchi sanje drupaju sanje chedang soichi cholam chanjo badu dani chasuji Dagi jinzo jipe sonam ji rula pinchi sanje rupajo sanje cheda soichi cholam janjo bado dani chasuji Dagi jinzo jipe sonam rula pinchi sanje rupajo Paden Save Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chuo Peme Den Shula Kadin Jimbo Gune Jezonde Kuzon Durjin Sadus. So firstly, I'd like to say good morning to everybody. And as I mentioned in the introductory session yesterday, this year I've been asked to continue the teaching I was giving in the Kibi session last year, which was the short text composed by the first Jamgon Control, called the Rays of the Vajra Moon, or its subtitle is A Guide to the Shentong Madhyamaka View. So actually there's a couple of translations of this text that have been done, and I think here in Kibi there are some copies of the translation we made some years ago in a form of a short booklet, but although it's short, it is in fact the entire text. So if you would like to, and if you don't have one, I guess Kibi office might have some to supply. It's quite a dense text. It's quite kind of detailed. So it might be useful either to use alongside the explanations in the sessions, or to be able to look at afterwards if you wanted to kind of really assimilate the teachings in a deep way. So, being as I'm halfway through the text, but being at the same time as quite a few of you, maybe, I don't know how many, maybe half of you were not here previously and have not received this teaching before, I guess I should use today's session. We have 6 sessions altogether. I should use today's session to go over the first half of the text, which we essentially completed last year. So this will mean that you can, when we start the new part of the text, as it were, you'll be fully kind of informed about what is the basis of this particular teaching. Without this, if you're coming new, it'll be very, very difficult. So let me do that. Let me use this morning to go over the teaching from last year, to see how far we can get, at least with that. And so to begin with, the text is a guide to the view. This particular type of work is called a guide to the view. The view meaning, in this case, the view, the understanding of reality, taught in the system of thought that we call Shentong Madhyamaka, or the Great Madhyamaka. And a guide to the view is, in a way, expressing the essence of the teachings so that we can not only understand them intellectually, but use them for meditation. We can apply them in meditation. So it's a text that's a kind of crossover from philosophical teachings to meditation practice. And that means, if one asks the question, how can we meditate on the teachings of Buddha nature? Kontrā Rinpoche's text would supply the answer. Here is the teachings, and here's how you meditate on it in a systematic way. And yes, that's really what this kind of text is about, is providing us with. Now, it's highly structured, meaning it's actually quite good for memorization of the key points. because it's structured in such a way, such a systematic way. So to begin with, Kontrön Rinpoche divides his text into 3 parts. Firstly, a short section on the history of this teaching, the sources from which this teaching arose. Then the actual guidance in the view, which is the bulk of the teaching, the biggest amount of this text is concerned with that, as it should be. And then thirdly, a kind of concluding part in which the benefits of the teaching are explained. One might think that should go first as a kind of advertisement to convince us why we should listen to the teaching and practice it. But no, it's quite common in traditional texts for the benefits to be explained at the end. So the first one then was the what I call the history, or as Kontrön Rinpoche says, the sources from which this teaching arose. And again, one might wonder, well, what is the purpose of hearing the mere history of the teaching? Well, the purpose is very important, actually, because in order to have confidence that the teaching is valuable and that we should, in fact, listen to it and practice it, we need to be, it's said in Dharma, we need to be confident in the sources, that it is, in fact, a genuine teaching of the Buddha, who for us, of course, is none other than the fully enlightened one. So that the teaching can be traced back to Buddha's own teachings is extremely crucial for us, that it wasn't a teaching simply some kind of philosophical speculation or intellectual speculation by some intelligent person or semi-intelligent person, but it is actually teaching from the fully enlightened one himself, and therefore we can rely upon it as part of our practice, part of our path to liberation and Buddhahood. And if the original source is the Buddha, as Kontrön Rinpoche will tell us, then also we need to know it's been transmitted through a line of accomplished masters, people who themselves have heard the teaching and realized it, so that it's like the power of the teaching is still present, is undiminished, coming down from Buddha through the line of masters to our day, to us, in fact, the recipients of the teaching. So that is the purpose of such a account of the sources of the teaching. So Kontrön Rinpoche in his text, or in the English translation of the text, there's a couple of pages. I'll try to, because I've done it before, in more detail, I'll try to summarize them, but there are some points that really, for newcomers, you actually need to hear. So the first thing to notice, or first thing to be aware of, is that it's tremendously important for us in assessing this teaching, or any teaching in fact, to understand that Buddha's teachings, although they're all the expression of his omniscience, his total wisdom with regard to the nature of phenomena and how phenomena arise, nevertheless, for the sake of his followers, his direct followers, indirectly us, his later followers, he didn't always present his teaching about the nature of phenomena, about the nature of reality, in exactly the same way, because he was extraordinarily sensitive to the needs of the disciples, of where they were coming from, of what their backgrounds were, of what their facilities, what their intelligence, what their motivation. All these things meant that Buddha varied his teaching to meet the needs of his audience. And so we generally say that in regard to Buddha's teachings, the statements made in the teachings, we should distinguish between teachings which are provisional and teachings which are definitive. And the meaning of these two terms is that definitive teachings are those in which Buddha described things as they truly are, without any need for further qualification. It's a statement of, as it were, describes reality, in which reality, the nature of things, is described nakedly, precisely. But at other times, Buddha taught about the nature of reality, the nature of mind, in a provisional way. In other words, making a statement that was adequate to the level of understanding of that particular audience, but was not a full presentation of the nature of reality. It was sufficient for those people, it was all they could manage to comprehend, to use, but those teachings must finally be, as it were, replaced by the definitive teachings. So that understanding that the teachings must be assessed as to whether they're provisional or definitive is generally very important in Dharma, but is going to be extremely important in terms of assessing the Buddha nature teachings, as you will see. So that is the first point to notice. Now, having understood that, Kontra Rinpoche, to explain the original source of the Buddha nature teachings, he discusses how the teachings of the Buddha themselves, particularly the sutras, the discourses, in which the non-tantric Dharma is contained, because the Vajrayana teaching, of course, is found in the Tantras. The common teachings of Buddha, both Hinayana and Mahayana, were presented by Lord Buddha in the sutras. But those sutras, delivered by Shakyamuni Buddha during the 45 years of his teaching, they fall, according to all Tibetan scholars actually, they fall into three distinct categories. Some scholars argue that represents three different periods in Buddha's teaching career. Others say it's merely three different ways in which the disciples understood the teaching. But which of these opinions is correct, it doesn't really matter for us. The principal point is that we can divide the content of the teaching into three. And those three are called the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The wheel of Dharma meaning the teaching given by Buddha. When Buddha first taught the Dharma, it was to reverse the wheel of birth and death, the wheel of samsara, to enable people to free themselves from that wheel of birth and death. So the presentation of the Dharma is called the turning of the wheel. But we, as Mahayanis, followers of the Mahayana teaching, say that the sutras fall into these three different categories. Sutras of the first turning of the wheel, sutras of the middle turning of the wheel, and sutras of the final turning of the wheel. The first turning of the wheel sutras are those in which Buddha presented the Hinayana, the so-called lesser vehicle, or the Shravakayana, the vehicle of the disciples, in which, as Control says, the principal aim of the teaching is to cause us to generate renunciation, turning away from samsara. It's expressed in such teachings as the Four Noble Truths. The second and third turning of the wheel are both Mahayana teachings. They present the Mahayana teaching of the Bodhisattva path, that it is, in others, that it's not sufficient simply to aim for one's own liberation from samsara. One must aim for Buddhahood. In other words, generate bodhicitta, become a bodhisattva. But within that Mahayana teaching, there's the two types of sutra. Teachings of the middle turning, teachings of the final turning. The sutras of the middle turning are those teachings, those sutras in which Buddha presented the nature of phenomena as emptiness, as empty of all intrinsic nature, such as the teachings such as the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. The sutras of the third turn of the wheel are Mahayana. They emphasize the Bodhisattva path, like the second turning, but they teach, alongside emptiness, they teach about the nature of mind, and most importantly for us, they teach the Buddha nature. There are at least 10 major sutras from the third turn of the wheel category in which the Buddha nature is presented as the real meaning of emptiness. So, therefore, later on, in India and in Tibet, Mahayana followers were divided, in a way, differed in their opinions about which of the second or third turnings of the wheel should be understood as Buddha's definitive, his final teaching. So, the line that we will be studying in this text, the Shentong Madhyamaka, the thinkers, the masters who took that standpoint, argue, as Kontra Rinpoche tells us, that while the second turning of the wheel teachings are definitive, when the Buddha says, all conditioned phenomena, all things that arise from cause and conditions, are empty of any intrinsic nature, they would say, but the Buddha nature itself is not empty in that way, is not empty of any intrinsic nature, is finally ultimately real, because it is unconditioned, unproduced, unceasing, and the real nature of our mind. So that is the way that the Shentong, the original source of the Shentong teaching is in those teachings concerning Buddha nature, those sutras concerning Buddha nature that are part of the third turning of the wheel. Whereas those people who see that the emptiness alone is the definitive teaching of the Buddha, those masters who argue that, they would say the Buddha nature teaching is provisional. It's a kind of metaphor for emptiness, but it mustn't be understood as ultimately real. So that is the big kind of division, the big distinction between these two lines of thought. One that I described yesterday as the common Madhyamaka, following the second turn of the wheel, and the other, which we call the uncommon Madhyamaka, or Shentong Madhyamaka, or Great Madhyamaka, which this text is going to teach us. So, then, having discussed that, Kontra Rinpoche, in this historical section, mentions the line, or some at least, some of the most important figures among the masters who promulgated this Shentong system in Tibet. So he says, in Tibet, from the time of the two translators, Zhugawe Dorje and Senko Wache, in the 11th century, two early Tibetan translators, who went to Kashmir to study this Dharma, until the present time, the exposition, the system famous as Shentong Madhyamaka, or in English we can translate Shentong as extrinsic emptiness, it literally means empty of other, has arisen through a number of traditions. The preeminent masters, or as he calls them, the great charioteers of this tradition in Tibet, were three. The third Karmapa, the omniscient Ranjan Dorji, although, as I mentioned last year, you should notice that Ranjan Dorji did not use that term Shentong. Although we can class his works, like the Namshi Yeshi and Nyingpo Tenpa, as indeed presenting this system, he did not use that terminology. The second of the three preeminent masters, Jamgon Kontra mentions, the second one is Dolpopa Sherab Jelsen. Dolpopa Sherpa Gyaltsam was a slightly younger contemporary of the third Karmapa. They knew each other. He did not come from the Kagyu tradition. He came from the small offshoot of Sakya called the Jonang tradition. And he is the one who actually coined this terminology of Shentong to label this system of thought. And the third preeminent master Jamgon Kongtrul mentions is the Nyingma master Longchen Rabjam, again a contemporary and actually colleague of the third Karmapa, who's most famous for his teachings on Dzogchen. And again, at this point, I should say, some masters argue that it's not correct to group Longchenpa as belonging to this system. So it's quite an argued point. But that Ranjan Dorji and Dolpopa belong to it is uncontroversial. Everybody agrees on that. Anyway, these three kind of leading masters of Shentong in Tibet were followed over the centuries by, and Kongtrul just kind of name drops, if you like, a few of them. The seventh Karmapa, Chodron Jamso. The Sakya master called Shakya Chogden. Sakya generally does not follow the Shentong system, but Shakya Chogden was an exception to that. The eighth Situ Tempa Ninje in the 18th century. The great Jonangpa master Taranatha in the 17th century, and so on. So those are some of the, and I mentioned yesterday, of course, that in the 19th century, Jamgon Kongtrul himself was perhaps the most famous exponent of this Shentong system. In the 20th century, many Karmakaju masters upheld the Shentong teachings. The 16th Karmapa Rigpa Dorji, although he didn't compose any works on it, was certainly very devoted to this system and helped to kind of sponsor it and to give his kind of weight to its promulgation, one might say. So perhaps the majority of Karmakaju masters in the last century have been followers of the Shentong system. But it's not unanimous. It's not like every Karmakajupa is necessarily a Shentongpa. For instance, it's just a historical point, but the actual previous Situ Rinpoche, although the 8th and 9th were definitely Shentongpas, the 11th Situ was a very strong opponent of the Shentong system, which just goes to show that in our Karmakaju tradition, we are not, it's not a kind of unanimity. There's room for kind of freedom of opinion on these matters. And then Kongtrul Rinpoche wants to talk about, so if that is the general source of the Shentong teachings, then he wants to talk about what is the source of this system of teaching the view, the Shentong view, the Buddha nature view, as a meditation system. Where does that come from? And he says, Kongtrul Rinpoche has told us, that essentially it comes from the great Indian Siddha, realized tantric master, Maitripa. Maitripa was 11th century master and one of the two main gurus of Marpa, the translator. And what's particularly important about, well, many things important about Maitripa, but one is that he, at a time when the teaching of the Uttara Tantra Shastra, this treatise on Buddha nature called the Supreme Continuity, which had been given by the Bodhisattva Maitreya through the Indian master Asanga way back in the 4th century. This teaching of the Uttara Tantra is the most kind of complete examination of the Buddha nature teaching found in the sutras. It's a shastra, it's an examination, a treatise. But it had kind of declined in popularity in India by the 11th century, but Maitripa rediscovered it, so to speak, and then taught it, but taught a system of meditation based upon it. And so he is the source of this system of meditating on the Buddha nature in a systematic way. And as Kontremite says, his promulgation of this system of meditation on the Buddha nature goes alongside his promulgation, his spreading of Mahamudra. Because although Mahamudra, its essential source is the Tantras, not the Sutras, Maitripa also presented the Mahamudra in a way that aligns it very much with the Buddha nature teaching. And so Kontremite, in a way, in this historical section, expresses his understanding that Buddha nature teaching and Mahamudra teaching are kind of twin-track approaches to enlightenment, which go naturally together side by side. And that is why many Kagyu teachers of Mahamudra, going back to Gampopa himself, have said that the Buddha nature teaching is a way, in a way, a Mahamudra practice. It contains the Mahamudra practice, not a tantric Mahamudra practice, but nevertheless a way of practicing Mahamudra. So, and perhaps you'll see that reflected in the teachings of the text. So that is the sources I've summarized from the text for that. Now the main part, and this is, of course, the bulk of the teaching. First of all, Control structures it in this way. Firstly, there will be a description of the guidance in the view according to the sutra tradition. Then there will be guidance in the view according to the profound Tantra tradition, the mantra tradition, the Vajrayana. Actually, that will be a shorter section. The sutra tradition section will be the principal one, but, and we haven't got to the Vajrayana last year, but we will. So first the sutra tradition. Now, he further divides that into two. What is to be understood and what is to be practiced. The significance of that division is that in a way we're going to get the same teaching presented to us twice. But once in a kind of theoretical way, in other words, what are the main philosophical points of this teaching that are to be understood? How does it relate to other teachings in the Dharma and so on? What are its core points? And then, having heard that, and in a way resolved our intellectual questions, our intellectual uncertainties about the teaching, then the second will be how to practice this, how to make a living experience of it, how to take it from a mere intellectual understanding to something we experience directly, because it's only through that direct experience that we're actually transformed, that realization can be gained. And that is the point about this teaching, to re-emphasize that. It's not simply a philosophical teaching. It is something to be realized like any meditation teaching. So, nevertheless, the first presentation, if you like, the theoretical or more intellectual presentation is necessary, and it's quite detailed. So, let's summarize this, because we've done it before, of course, last year. What is to be understood? So, Control Rinpoche, Jamgon Control begins his text. Jamgon Control Lodro Thaye, of course, is his full name, and so perhaps to avoid a kind of confusion between the first and fourth Jamgon Controls, we should present Jamgon Control first with his refuge name, Lodro Thaye. So Jamgon Control Lodro Thaye says, first of all, you need to have acquired some kind of the correct worldly view. What does he mean by that? The correct worldly view means you need to have confidence in the Buddha's basic teachings on concerning karma, cause and effect. And that is to say that unless you understand how happiness arises from virtuous actions and how suffering arises from non-virtuous actions meaning those motivated by desire, hatred and ignorance, unless you understand that and therefore take up a moral life, train in morality, the first of the three basic trainings taught by the Buddha, then it would be a waste of time to try to listen to the philosophical teachings on the nature of ultimate truth. First get, as it were, straight with relative, with conventional truth. A person who does not create a strong basis in that way is not suited to the deeper teaching. So he just presented that, and we accept it. Now he turns immediately to the teachings on the ultimate truth. And the way he does that, to how he treats the teaching of the ultimate truth here, is by giving us, in a very brief fashion, a summary of how the different Buddhist tenet systems or philosophical schools have understood what they've understood as the ultimate teaching of the Buddha, the teaching concerned with ultimate reality, with the true nature of things. And he does that to show how, in a way, the Buddhist teachings, the teachings found in the Buddhist philosophical schools, represent a ladder. Each school is a kind of step on the ladder, which will culminate in the definitive view. Because for mostly, we need to approach the most profound teachings in that gradual step-by-step way. Because for most of us, the most profound, the ultimate teachings are going to be very difficult to really understand properly, or to put it in a way, not to misunderstand. So therefore, yet at the same time, we need to understand what is insufficient about the other schools' presentation about the nature of ultimate reality. Anyway, this is what Control says. To rely on the unmistaken profound view, you should know that firstly, the Shravakas, the Hinayanas, if you like, the disciples, to give them an English title, the followers of the first turn of the wheel, they meditate on establishing the selflessness of the individual person. So for them, when Buddha talked about emptiness, the true nature of phenomena, for them they took that simply to mean that there is no I, no truly existent personal self, permanent, autonomous, and singular. Of course, such a notion that there is a truly existent personal self is found in all non-Buddhist philosophical systems, and of course also even among those who are not philosophical, because all of us who are unenlightened, cling to such a notion, both intellectually and emotionally. So it is the teaching of non-self is what sets Buddhism apart from all other philosophical systems, whether religious or philosophical. So the Shravakas meditate, that's how they understand, that's what they understand to be the Buddha's deepest teaching. Is it? No, it's not. Is it incorrect? No, it's correct. It is true, there is no personal, individual self. But emptiness goes much deeper than that. As he says, the Shravakas understood that. The Pratyeka Buddhas, the solitary realizers, another branch of followers of the Hinayana, they understood that not only the individual self is empty, but that external objects also don't truly exist, but that the subject consciousness perceiving them, that does exist. The third philosophical school, the Chittamatrins or Yogacharians, the mind-only school, they were Mahayanists, and their view is more profound. They argued that both the objects of perception and the subject perceiving them are both empty. So for them that is the meaning of emptiness, that the mind is empty of both objects and subject. That division is not real. And then, fourthly, the common Madhyamakas, the followers of the common Madhyamaka, following the second turn of the wheel, they said that the ultimate teaching is that all phenomena are essentially empty. Control says, followers of these schools may indeed, by meditating on those views, come to such experiences, but they're still, as he puts it, essentially erroneous views. They're still bound by their intellectual concepts, and therefore they cannot establish the non-dual primordial wisdom. And so, as a result, Buddhahood is far from them. In other words, there is still, even among the common Madhyamakas, it's not the actual naked wisdom which leads to Buddhahood, which transforms you from an ordinary worldly being into a noble being and finally into a Buddha. So, what do we do then, as we are ordinary people, far from the level of a noble one, a Arya, who has this non-dual, has experienced this non-dual primordial wisdom, in which they transcend the notion of subject and object entirely? Well, Control says, even now as ordinary beings, ordinary practitioners, we can meditate, we can hear, think, and meditate in a way that is harmonious with the primordial wisdom, and that will therefore, as it were, prepare us for the primordial wisdom to arise. Because here's a crucial point that we mustn't misunderstand. That primordial wisdom that we're talking about just now, it cannot be engineered. It cannot be created, not by the right philosophical opinions, nor even by meditation techniques, because it actually is the nature of reality in which there's no technique, in which there's no cause and result, in which there's no meditator and meditation object, in which there's no viewer and object of view. All these are labels, conceptual notions reinforced by linguistic labels. So even the idea of meditating, I'm going to meditate on emptiness, will not lead you to this primordial wisdom. In fact, it will be a subtle barrier to experiencing the primordial wisdom. Only when you let go of all reference points can the primordial wisdom that is already present within your mind, I'm actually skipping forward to later teachings in this text, of course, by saying this, but only by letting go of all labels can that primordial wisdom actually shine in your mind, because all labels obscure it. But despite that fact that we're still ordinary people, bound by labels, by concepts, we have to work with them, we can follow a system of practice, of hearing, thinking, meditating, that will, so to speak, get us in the right place where finally all labels and concepts can fall away. So that is the context of this teaching, of the Shentong view. It's to get us in that right place. Now, we're not done with the intellectual presentation, because Control then, having distinguished Shentong in that way from the other philosophical systems, says that intellectually we can approach this, the Shentong teaching, from two directions. And that depends upon it almost, well, not almost, it depends upon what kind of philosophical systems we've been following up to this point. So the first way is for those who have an affinity with the common Madhyamaka, the teaching of, as he puts it, the teaching of those who assert the absence of essence. That's the hallmark of the second turning of the wheel sutras, in which Buddha proclaimed repeatedly, all phenomena are like dreams, like illusions, like the appearance of the moon's reflection in water, absolutely devoid of any substantiality, any solidity, any essence. So it's an extremely powerful teaching, of course. So those who have come through that way of thinking and that way of practicing, they can approach the Shentong through that system. So he describes how one would do that. And then later on in the meditation teaching, he'll repeat this, but in a more meditative way. So what Control Lodra Thaye says is, their system, the teaching of the common Madhyamikas, asserts that the true nature of all phenomena, from the form skandha, the body itself, right up to the qualities of a Buddha, such as omniscience, are in fact unaccomplished, non-accomplished emptiness, meaning there's no substance there whatsoever. They're no more real than, as he puts it, the horns of a rabbit, which of course is famous for never having had any horns in the first place, or for the child of a barren woman, something that cannot possibly ever have existed. That is what is asserted by this teaching of the second turn of the wheel. And we don't dissent from that as Shentongpas. We agree, all conditioned phenomena are indeed like that. But the common Madhyamikas think that is the end of the story, so to speak. So, in the common Madhyamaka, if one asks the question, how do these essentially empty phenomena ever arise in the first place then, if they're unreal, like dreams? Their rising and unceasing appearance occurs through dependent origination, praticca samuppada in Sanskrit, or tendril in Tibetan. That is to say, that the very characteristic of conditioned phenomena is precisely that they only arise, they only seem to appear, because they're mere appearances only, through the coming together of the appropriate causes and conditions. The reflection of the moon in a pool of water is without any solidity whatsoever, but it's distinctly seen. Why? Because the sky that night is free of clouds, the Earth's satellite is in the right position, there's a pool of water, and you're passing by with eyes. Precisely because all those different conditions and causes come together, at that moment the clear, vivid appearance of a moon manifests. But if you were to wade into the pool, thinking that moon is something solid and I can take it home to impress the wife, you're going to be very disappointed. And your wife is going to be even more disappointed because it's not there. Immediately you wade into the water, it disappears because it was just like a magical appearance, utterly dependently arising and nothing more. All phenomena are like that. So the key to that understanding is whatever is conditioned is dependent, whatever is dependent is empty of any intrinsic nature. And we're, of course, in total agreement with that. You can definitively establish it, Jamgon Kotra Lodra Thaye says, by the 5 great reasonings of Madhyamaka. 5 great reasons of Madhyamaka taught by Mipam Rinpoche, for instance, in his famous work, the Kenjuk. They're expounded by the great masters in India, such as Chandrakirti and Shantideva chapter 9 of Bodhicharvatara, but all really come down to this point, that whatever is dependently arising cannot be found to have even an atom of true existence, of substantial existence. So he says that by using this reasoning, these reasonings, including dependent origination, it's like the fire produced by rubbing two sticks together. The fire first consumes the sticks, and then in turn itself the fire disappears. What does he mean? He means you use the notion of emptiness to destroy your clinging to there being any truly existent phenomena. But emptiness is not itself a substance. It's not like we're saying to somebody, you believe that all these things are true, but what we're saying is, forget all those things. The real substance is emptiness. Everything is just emptiness, as if emptiness was itself a substance. But emptiness is not. Emptiness is just a remedy to you clinging to those things as being truly existent. So that is the way that the common Madhyamaka reasoning is to work, to abolish, is a remedy to clinging to solidity or substantiality. Now, and here's the crossover point for such people into Shentong view. Jampa Contra says, if you've got that far with your common Madhyamaka reasoning, so you've abolished clinging to things that are having true nature, inherent existence, then if such followers of the common Madhyamaka, then cultivate without mental activity the realization of non-self or emptiness using a method of non-meditation on the space-like nature, they'll develop many samadhis, many doors of shamatha and vipassana. So he's saying, go from your concept, your theoretical understanding of emptiness, apply that in meditation now. And the way to do that is by letting go of conceptualization, even the conceptualization of investigating phenomena to see whether they're empty or not, and just rest. It's like you should, by this analytical meditation that you've done, using the Madhyamaka reasonings, you should have cleared a space, so to speak, where you're no longer fixating on phenomena as real. Then give up even the framework of meditating to discover emptiness. Relax entirely without that. And then real authentic meditation experience will arise. You'll, as it were, make the progression from an analyst to a real meditator. The ones who do that, then, as he says, if such followers are subsequently properly introduced through the utterly pure transmissions and oral instructions, they will then arise from erroneous views and perspectives into discriminating wisdom. They realize the view of the extraordinary great Madhyamaka. What he means by that long sentence is that the Madhyamaka meditator, who's gone from a mere intellectual understanding into this experience of emptiness, by letting go of even the concept of emptiness, they're ready to be, for their Lama to introduce them to the Buddha nature teaching. Because they won't, when they hear the Buddha nature teaching, they won't misidentify it. They won't misidentify it as, for instance, oh, it's a real self, or a soul, or a kind of indwelling God, or anything substantial, or an eternal essence. They'll not make any of those mistaken interpretations of the Buddha nature teaching, because it's like they've purified their clingings to such opinions entirely by meditating emptiness according to the ordinary Madhyamaka. So that is when as he puts it, the introduction can be made. And that's very significant for two reasons. The first is that, in a way, the Buddha nature teaching is cannot be understood through reasoning. I don't mean it's irrational, or you have to believe in it simply by mere blind faith, but the very nature of our reasoning, which uses concepts, of course, cannot lead us any further than negating that which is untrue. That which is untrue, which is unreal. And that's the sublime power of the ordinary Madhyamaka. That through this extraordinary precise reasoning, it cuts through all our clinging to notions such as this is real, this is permanent, and so on. Even to the extremes of clinging to extremes of eternalism or materialism, or this is real, this is not real, this is something, this is nothing. All these extremes which we may cling to are demolished by the Madhyamaka reasoning. It gives us nowhere to fix upon. No opinions are conform to reality. Reality, like space, cannot be labeled, cannot be grasped through labeling. We're trying through our dualistic philosophies always to get hold of things and say, this is real, this is not. This is this is not. But we have to let go of that. And Madhyamaka, common Madhyamaka allows us to do that. And only when we've let go of all those labelings can we be then introduced to that which is naturally present, the Buddha nature. Because if we're introduced before we give up labels, we will simply think, oh, this is a self, this is me, this is my soul, this is my immortal soul, this is my Atman or my Brahman or whichever label you take from your previous non-Buddhist philosophy. So it's crucial that we have an understanding of the common Madhyamaka. And the second reason why I say there's something very significant about this sentence is because in Tibetan, well, I've translated into English as you need to be properly introduced. That word introduced in Tibetan is notro. Notro, which means something like pointing out the essence. But it is a word used usually in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, particularly Mahamudra, to indicate the Lama introducing you to the nature of your mind, either by words or symbols or, in most profound ways, by just it's kind of mental transmission. But Notra is a very Mahamudra word, so to speak. So it's significant that Jamgon Kontra Lodro Thaye uses it here to talk about how you have to be introduced beyond reasoning, when all reasoning is finished, to the Buddha nature. He's again showing how it's aligned with in his understanding anyway, it's aligned with Mahamudra. So that is the way that the common Madhyamikas can approach the Shentong teaching. So if somebody has a strong affinity with the common Madhyamaka, then they can use it as the stepping stone into Shentong. But the final crossover must occur when the Lama or Lamas explain to them the definitive meaning of the Buddha nature teaching. Now the other approach that Kontra Lodro Thaye spells out, by which we can get the Shentong view, is for those who he calls Yogacharins. Now, Yogacharin, or the noun is Yogachara, the practice of yoga, and it in Dharma language, Yogachara, or Yogacharin, a follower of, usually indicates a follower of the mind-only school, the Chittamatrins, the third of the four schools of tenets, the other Mahayana school of tenets apart from Madhyamaka. And generally, we consider, all those in Tibetan lines, consider the Chittamatra to be inferior to Madhyamaka as a philosophical school. And in fact, just a couple of pages ago, that's how Contra Lodro Thaye presented it. It was inferior even to the common Madhyamaka. But Shentong Madhyamaka has a kind of place for the Chittamatra, I could put it like that it considers that the Chittamatra school has some very valuable insights and therefore can be used as a way to approach the final view, the Shentong Madhyamaka view. So now also the thing about the Chittamatra school is the third turn of the wheel sutras included sutras which act as a source for the Chittamatra view. And Chittamatra view, of course, means simply all is mind. Such sutras as the Lankavatara Sutra, for instance, are famous as mind-only sutras, at least as sources of it. So, what the Jamgon Contra Lodro Thaye says for this is, those who rely on the teaching of Maitreya, his 5 works, on the third turn of the wheel, most important one being the Supreme Continuity, the Jude Lama, to give to his Tibetan title, should use the texts of the intermediate wheel, the second turning, the essential emptiness teachings, and their commentaries, in order to cut through the elaborations of incidental, deceptively appearing phenomena. So they too should use the second turning of the wheel sutras to cut through any clinging to objects and subjects as being real, so that they don't misidentify the Buddha nature when they're introduced to it. But he says, if however one didn't have the time from this, it will be sufficient simply to rely upon the 5 treatises of Maitreya. So you don't need, if you don't have the time, then you can skip those and just use the 5 texts of Maitreya. And if you don't have time for all 5 of them, just the Jude Lama itself, the 5th and final one, the Supreme Continuity text, given by Maitreya to a Sangha, this will be sufficient as a kind of theoretical basis through which you could approach Shentong. If even this is not possible, so for those who don't even have time or the opportunity to receive the teachings of the Uttara Tantra, then there's this method to prepare you for the Shentong view. I should kind of put in here that Contra Lodro Thaye could actually have mentioned at this point the 2 works of the third Karmapa, Ranjan Namshi Yeshi and Nyingpo Tempa. These would also be a very good theoretical basis for receiving the Shentong teaching. But here's what he says in this text, Jamgon says in this text. Once one has understood that there is nothing apart from mind, one realizes that mind itself is non-existent. The intelligent, when they have understood this twofold non-existence, remain in the Dhamma Dhatu. Dhamma Dhatu, the Dhamma element. Here it's a synonym for Buddha nature. In other words, he's proposing for people coming from this direction, the Yogacharan direction, mind-only direction, to Shentong, to see it as 2 stages, essentially consisting of two stages. Now, if any of you have received, and I guess many of you have, the teaching of Lojong, the 7 points of training, 7 points of mind training, and if, for instance, you've received the commentary of Jamgon Contra Lodro Thaye on that, you will be familiar with this, because the meditation on what is called the ultimate bodhicitta is in fact this twofold approach. First, realizing that there is nothing external to mind, and they're realizing that mind itself, as the basis of appearances, is naturally empty. Anyway, Jamga Contra will take us through this. We'll go through it briefly. In other words, he says, the point of this twofold approach is firstly to understand that all appearances, whatever appears through the senses, whatever arises simply as mental objects, all arise in dependence upon the temporary unawareness aspect of one's own mind. In other words, they arise due to one's mind being affected by the karmic imprints of past experience, which you mistakenly do not realize, at the same time as mistakenly grasping mind as a self. This has been going on, as he says, your mind has been stained in this way by these karmic imprints since beginningless time. You do not realize that, and therefore these karmic imprints give rise to all these appearances which you see mistakenly as a truly valid external world, whether it's sounds, whether it's visual appearances, whether it's smells, whatever it is. All these are simply the manifestation of your deluded mind, stained as it is temporarily by karmic imprints. Because when you examine those appearances, they're found not to be accomplished. Each is empty of essence. They're no more real than the appearances in the dreams we experienced last night. When we went to sleep last night, the imprints of various actions, thoughts, and emotions that had been carried in our mind from the previous day or from past lives arose and produced the appearances of the dreams, the enticing dreams, the frightening dreams, the mundane dreams, whatever it was. Those appearances which seemed so vivid and real to us at night, so that we reacted with delight or fear or terror or whatever it was, they, when we awoke, realized they're not there. I didn't go to these places. These people did not come to me. These are merely the play of my mind caused by karmic imprints. Well, that is what we should have realized on awaking, of course. But it is the same for all appearances. So-called daytime appearances are no more than that also. They're also the way the world appears to me, the way beings appear to me, is due to my karmic imprints. Yes, the appearances in daytime seem stronger than the appearances in dreams, but that's just because the imprints which are their basis are stronger, because the imprints that have been repeated again and again. So they give me the illusion that I'm in the human realm, that I'm experiencing the world in this way. And because other beings at this moment also have similar imprints ripening their mind, we imagine we're living in the same world. But actually we're not. We just have similar imprints ripening at this particular moment, giving us the illusion of inhabiting a common world, which is then reinforced by agreement to utter certain sounds at the appearance of certain appearances. But none is real. All is just my mind, like the moon appearing in water. Such is conventional truth, as Control Lodro Thai says. Furthermore, then if I think, well, okay, I concede that the objects that I experience are unreal, then only the manifestation of karmic imprints, but the mind that is their basis is real, which would give me something solid to grasp at as real, if it was the case. He says, furthermore, the subject mind itself is not real. Look for it, he says. Look for it. Is the mind, if the mind is real, if it's solid, if it has inherent nature, it will have a location. So where might that be? Is it inside the body? If it were inside the body, it would not experience the outer world. If it's outside the body, it would not experience these feelings that happen within the body. If we apply that to time, the mind of the past has finished. The mind of the future has not arisen. And the mind of the present, where is it? If it's, anyway, it would have a location, as we've just said. Moreover, it would have a shape, but it doesn't have any shape. Moreover, it would have a color, but it doesn't. In other words, it has none of the characteristics of a truly existent entity that I can grasp and say, this is it, this is something real, something solid. All the subject consciousnesses, the visual consciousness, the eye, the hearing consciousness, and so on, they are just empty, just like the appearance to the consciousnesses, so the consciousnesses themselves are empty. Because if there's no objects that are real, there's no real subject perceiving them. So you cannot, as it were, say, I, the perceiver, am real, if what is being perceived is not real. That dualistic structure that I impose upon all experience is a delusion. It's just a habit of mind that I indulge in to give me some feeling of security, of solidity. But when one really looks into the nature of experience, one doesn't find it. So, as Control Order Thai continues, the point of Maitreya's teaching, how the Buddha nature is introduced, is as follows. One should recognize the primordial wisdom of the emptiness of subject and object in this manner, as we've just done. That I say, you can look at the ultimate Bodhicitta teachings in the Lojong for further guidance on this. Then, one should settle in the true nature of reality that pervades everything from sentient beings to Buddhas. And once again, settle means give up reasoning. You've done your reasoning, you've done your negation. Then again, as it says in the Lojong teachings, let the remedy go free by itself. Settle in the alaya, the kunji, the basis. And the kunji, or the basis, is the Buddha nature, as Control says here. This true nature that you should settle in, that pervades everything from sentient beings to Buddhas, is the naturally luminous Buddha nature, primordially unfettered or unstained by impurities, the very reality of ultimate truth. We can be introduced to it at this point precisely because we've done the reasoning that allows us to negate any clinging. Then we settle, we relax. Settle means to relax. No need to reason. You don't need to prove the Buddha nature to be true. You don't need to examine it. It cannot be examined. It is the very primordial nature itself, unconditioned, just like space. How can you analyze space? How can you prove space? How can you take hold of space? You cannot. You simply relax into it. Again, it's a meditation of non-meditation, of completely and utterly letting go. You're there. You're home. You relax in what is naturally and always has been naturally present, the primordially unproduced. That is the Buddha nature, and it is the true nature of the minds of all beings, both the most deluded, most lowly being, temporarily, to the most exalted, to the Buddhas themselves. The Buddha nature is no different in a Buddha than it is in us or in insects. All that possesses mind has this same Buddha nature. I don't mean they're all part of one substance or one grand whole, one thing. The Buddha nature is the nature of the mind of all individual mind streams. That is the meaning of the Buddha nature. To say it pervades all sentient beings, from sentient beings to Buddhas, is that, to indicate the nature of their mind stream is identical in being the Buddha nature, the naturally luminous Buddha nature. So this is the way we approach it from the Yogachara or Chittamatra point of view. And with that, the section on what is to be understood is completed. So now we are we reach the what is to be practiced section. What is to be practiced section. We've done about half of what we did in the entire teaching last year, so I guess we should be quite pleased. I'm not sure, but maybe we should be. What is to be practiced? We have a few minutes. Let's just do a tiny bit of this. What is to be practiced is, so remember, we're moving from the intellectual presentation now to the so to speak, the nuts and bolts of practice, the instructions for practice. It's kind of, we assume that we've done that work. We've been through the teaching, at least intellectually, up to this point. So what is to be practiced, Control Lodro Thaye divides into 3 to begin with. Preliminaries, Nundro of course. Main part, the actual core meditations themselves, and how we conclude sessions of meditation. So the first one is the preliminaries. All Dharma practices have preliminaries. Essentially, for any Mahayana practice, it must begin with refuge and bodhicitta, for instance. But here, the preliminaries distinguished by Jampa Control, he's talking about what I might call general preliminaries, which in fact would be common to any Dharma practice. So he says that the stages of purifying the Buddha nature, which is like a wish-fulfilling gem, is of course a common metaphor. Why is the Buddha nature like a wish-fulfilling gem? Because it's the basis of everything we could wish for. Through cultivating the Buddha nature, we will achieve happiness, we will achieve liberation from samsara, and finally we'll achieve Buddhahood. So in that way, to know about the Buddha nature is like being given possession of a wish-fulfilling gem. But, of course, the problem that we have now is that this wish-fulfilling gem, our primordial true nature, the true nature of our mind, is covered, is stained. In fact, it's so covered and so stained that we cannot even glimpse its existence. We don't even realize it's present within us as the true nature of our mind. It's covered over, as Control Lodro Thaye says, by gross, subtle, and very subtle stains. Those gross stains we could describe as the disturbing emotions, the 6 root disturbing emotions, the 20 minor disturbing emotions. The subtle obscuration is the obscuration of ignorance about the true nature of reality, dualistic thought itself. And the subtle obscurations are the very subtle obscurations that remain at the far end of the bodhisattva path, the obscurations called the obscurations of meditation, not our obscurations of meditation, very, very subtle obscurations of meditation, still remain to be purified when you're on the 8th bodhisattva level. These are discussed in Karmapa Ranjan Dorji's Nimpo Tempa, so you can see them there, which, of course, the present incarnation is going through with you, teaching you. So we have to see like that there are stains to be removed. And to begin with, we begin removing those stains by using the teachings of the first turning of the wheel. Because, from our point of view, there is a common thread running through all the Buddhist teachings, and therefore through all the so-called tenet systems. They're all really concerned with how to remove what covers over our Buddha nature. In the early stages, that may be not even explicit that that's what you're doing, removing the stains covering your Buddha nature, but it's in fact what you are doing. So even the Hinayana teachings are about that, our method of of removing stains, not the subtle ones, the gross ones. But you know, like they say, we've all got to begin somewhere. I mean, for you, those lucky ones here who only have the subtle stains, you don't listen to this next bit. But for the rest of us, poor, gross, stained beings, we need this. So the exalted 8th level bodhisattvas, you can go for lunch now. But the rest of us, we stay for a few minutes at least. How do we start? We start by, so our general preliminaries is to start by contemplating, as Contra explains, the four seals. The four seals, I think it's familiar, this notion of four seals is probably familiar to you. The four seals are described by Vasubandhu as the four identifying marks of a Buddhist teaching. A Buddhist teaching, a teaching given by the Buddha, we can always distinguish it from non-Buddhist teaching, non-Buddhist philosophical or spiritual teaching, because it conforms to these four seals, which are four, as it were, things that we can notice about the nature of the world, which are, one, firstly, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. All condition, whatever arises from cause and conditions, precisely because of that, because it arises from cause and conditions, is impermanent. It is not there naturally. It's not there primordially. It appears at a certain moment in time due to cause and conditions interacting. And that means it's also disappearing from that very moment it appears. That is the subtle meaning of the teaching of impermanence. That everything is no sooner manifesting than it's disintegrating. Some things visibly disintegrate immediately. Some things appear to last longer. But they're still disintegrating, in fact, and constantly changing. That's the first seal. And of course, that means that all our hopes that we invest in permanence, in eternal existence, in our property, ourself, our objects, lasting forever is totally delusory. And so we develop some renunciation by taking to heart that teaching. Secondly, that all contaminated phenomena are suffering. The meaning of contaminated means essentially contaminated by clinging to self. Wherever there is self-centeredness, the actions done through those produce results which don't go beyond suffering. And as all of us are at this moment under the influence of self-clinging and self-cherishing, even our virtuous actions of non-violence, of giving, and so on and so forth, still are contaminated by self-interest. And therefore they do not lead us out of samsara, the cycle of birth and death. Within samsara, we heavily contaminated actions done by undisguised hatred, desire, and ignorance lead to the lower realms, of course, if fully matured, or at least if we're reborn as humans, as manifestations of suffering. But even those virtuous actions, as I said, which lead to good rebirth, we're still trapped by the suffering. For instance, the suffering of human life, birth, old age, sickness and death, and so on. So all contaminated phenomena are suffering. Taking that to heart produces strong renunciation thought, strong determination for liberation. And thirdly, the third seal is that all phenomena are devoid of a self, are in fact empty. That whereas we cling to the notion that our person is something that our mind is either or belongs to something permanent and singular and autonomous, that is self-controlling, and likewise that phenomena have some inherent substance, some reality that I can grasp at. All this is delusory, because when I examine my 5 aggregates from form to consciousness, there is nothing that I can identify as a self, either in the aggregates or owning the aggregates. And neither is that the case with any object, from an atom to a moment of mind, that there's anything real, that I can say this is a self, this is substantial. And finally, the final seal is nirvana alone, the cessation of suffering, is true bliss, is true peace. A teaching that conforms to that doesn't contradict it, is a Dharma teaching. And so by training on it, by taking those teachings to heart, we make the first step in purifying our mind, which is none other than the Buddha nature. Control adds that if you wanted to practice another preliminary teaching, such as the common preliminaries taught in the graduated path systems, like the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, which probably you'll be familiar with through Mahamudra Nundro or even the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, then this would equally serve as a good general preliminary. So I guess we've been summoned by the bell, which is of course announcing to us the reality of momentary impermanence. So we shouldn't fight that. Well, we still have a little bit to revise from last year, but we now reach the main point of the the main part of the meditation. So tomorrow morning, I think we meet tomorrow morning. We'll go through that tomorrow. Yes. So let's conclude with dedication of merit, and of course look forward to a wonderful opportunity to be with His Holiness this afternoon. Sunnam di tanshi zikpa ne tobe ne pim. Chiga nachi bala trupaye sepe sole drowa sho. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thank you to the translators, and yes, we'll see each other this afternoon.
I thought she was talking about the book itself.
I mentioned the book is in the office.
Yes, I wanted to announce this.